And now it is my great honor to introduce this morning's guest minister, Justin Schroeder, who until 2021, I believe, served as senior minister at First Universalist. He now, with his wife, is holding spaces, an opportunity for people going through instant change in their lives, significant change, to help think through it. And he has, as he will tell you, a history with Reverend Laura, and she invited him to come help while she was on sabbatical, and we are grateful that you took up that invitation. So, Justin, thank you.
There we go. How's that, if it's up there? That's good. All right. Well, it is really delightful to be here with you all this morning. I want to say thanks to Chad for just being a kind of a co-pilot and putting together the service, and Polly, we haven't met, but your drumming with music along is awesome, and Bruce and the tech team back there. I'm just really delighted to be here with you all this morning in this space. Reverend Laura is a really dear friend and a colleague, and we've known each other for years. 17 years ago, when I did my ministerial intern at Unitarian in St. Paul, Laura was on the board of trustees, and I remember the moment when I walked into my first board meeting, so a learning environment for an intern, and I remember her big smile and her warm welcome. It was clear that she loved Unitarian Universalism, and it was clear that she loved people. Years later, when I was serving at First Universalist Church of Minneapolis as the senior minister, and Laura was pursuing her Master's of Divinity, she did her ministerial internship at First Universalist Church, and she was fantastic. With her efforts, we secured a grant to mobilize Unitarian Universalists from around the state to work with other partners to help defeat the marriage amendment that would have defined marriage as only being between a man and a woman. And I learned so much from her that year, her ability to organize and to inspire and to bring people together. So when she reached out to me and asked if I would preach, of course, I had to say yes. And it's hard to say no to Laura, too. I don't know if you guys have had that experience with her, but she's really good at looking into your soul and pulling that yes right out of you, which I think I actually love it. I wanted to be here, and it was a joy to say yes, particularly on this 100-year anniversary of the Flower Communion celebration. So I'm delighted to be here and in this space with you all and to celebrate this distinctly Unitarian Universalist ritual, this Flower Communion ritual. So earlier, Chad beautifully shared some of the basics of this story of how Norbert Capek came to create the Flower Communion and how it started in that small church outside of Prague. And this morning, I want to do a little bit of a deeper dive into that and to do some exegesis of the story and the ritual itself. I know I just used a big fancy word, big fancy seminary word. Some of you may know what that means. Chad probably knows. Some of you may have heard it as well. Exegesis is the word, but I didn't know that word when I first heard it. I was just starting seminary and someone was talking about doing exegetical work and exegesis and all this stuff. And I heard it as exa and then Jesus, as in Jesus of Nazareth. And I thought, holy cow, is this some super G, a way to describe a descriptor for super Jesus or something I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea what it meant. I quickly learned that exegesis really just means interpretation. It means digging into the story to see the larger context and the clues in that story. So there's a richer, fuller understanding of what it is about. So that's what I want to do with you all this morning in this time we have together, to interpret and to look at the deeper meanings of the Flower Communion ritual. Are you with me? All right, let's do that together. The American tennis legend, Arthur Ashe, is credited with saying, "Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can." Start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. This sentiment is both pragmatic and demanding because it's asking you to act, not to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect group of people or the perfect mastery of content or whatever it is, or the perfect supplies to do the thing you need to do. It's asking you to start right where you are, to use what you have, and to do what you can. And that is exactly what Norbert Capek, the founder of the Unitarian Church in Czechoslovakia, did when he introduced the flower communion 100 years ago. As you heard in the story from Chad, Capek started where he was, right where he was, in this plain, simple country church, seeking to respond to the religious needs of the people he served, of that community. And he recognized those needs were perhaps similar to some of his own needs, given the religious journey he had been on. You see, Capek was raised Roman Catholic, but the inconsistencies demonstrated by the priests that he witnessed in his parish, what they said versus what they actually did, it caused him to resign when he was 19 years old. He then became baptized as a Baptist, and through continuous study and exploration and an open mind, he came to believe that a free Christian faith was native to his people, to his fellow Czech citizens, and that there had been fellow Christian Czechoslovakians before him that believed that the spiritual life was more important than religious doctrine or religious dogma. This is what a free faith means. We often talk about Unitarian Universalism as a free faith, but there are other expressions of free faith where the individual conscience and the spiritual life is far more important than doctrinal statements or creeds or dogma. Capek left Czechoslovakia in 1914 on the eve of World War I, and he accepted a call to serve as a Baptist minister in New York. And then a year later, he served a congregation in New Jersey. During this time, Capek was a leader and a participant in the International Association for Religious Freedom, this group that was formed by Unitarians. Through that association and through his own continuous spiritual development, he came to realize that even being a Baptist was too confining for him. So in 1919, he resigned as a Baptist minister, and in 1921, he and his wife, Maya, joined the Unitarian Church in Orange, New Jersey. So that's the arc from Catholicism to kind of progressive or more open-minded Protestant to Unitarianism. A few years later, he and Maya returned after the war to newly independent Czechoslovakia. He was on fire for the free faith of Unitarianism, and he helped Unitarianism take root and to really flourish in Czechoslovakia. One of the congregations you heard about was this small community church just outside of Prague. And in that congregation, there were former Catholics and former Protestants and liberal Jews, all of whom were skittish around religious authority and dogma and doctrine. Capek wanted to bind this community together through some shared ritual. So he started where he was, with that group of people in that small country church, and he used what he had, these beautiful flowers that dotted the countryside. He did what he could. He created a simple flower communion ritual to bind this diverse group of people together. In 1940, Capek's wife, Maya, came back to the United States to raise money for the Prague Unitarian Church, and this is when she introduced the flower communion to the Cambridge Church. And it quickly spread throughout Unitarian churches and then later the Unitarian Universalist churches, and it has been practiced ever since. It's a beautiful ritual. I imagine many of you are familiar with it, right? You've done this year after year. You know the story. My wife and I have a running joke between the two of us because she's heard me preach on this a number of times. And the trick is always like, how do you lift up something new and a little different and reflective in this story? And so we always joke, she's like, it was about some guy going through the fields and getting flowers and making a ritual. And it's like, that's it, but there's more. There's more that I want to share this morning about this ritual and the expression of Unitarianism in the Czech Republic. So I want to begin with an image we're going to put up on the screen if we're able to. Okay. So we're diving deep into the flower communion ritual and sort of what it means. So this is the symbol of the Czech Unitarianism. So this is what the Unitarians in the Czech Republic used to symbolize their Unitarian faith. And Reverend Dr. Peter Samoyski, he's a current Unitarian minister in Prague, he explains that the two sunflowers symbolically, you can see those two sunflowers, symbolically represent the diversity of people. One is taller, one is shorter, but neither is more valuable than the other. The sunflowers rest in that giant U that you can see. And as the Reverend Samoyski explains, this is for unity and for Unitarianism. The whole image is in the shape of a shield when you look at it, which is not the equipment of a Unitarian crusader, right? One who is forcefully or violently converting others to their faith. Reverend Samoyski explains that the shield is a symbol of protection and the desire to protect the unique spiritual values that the Czech Unitarians cherish, that we also cherish. The freedom of conscience, the right to choose how you believe and how those beliefs are expressed. As Reverend Samoyski explains, the symbol in its essential form was first used in the late 1920s, so right around when Norbert Capek created the flower communion ritual. He didn't design the symbol, but he knew about it, he supported it, it was in those congregations. The sun up in the sky can be understood as God or spirit or wisdom, beauty, justice, truth, that which nourishes us, and we are anchored in the earth, the home from which we all spring. Just as the shield is a way to resist, to be protected from those forces that seek to destroy cherished values, the flower communion ritual itself is also a form of deep resistance. According to Reverend Peter Samoyski, the flower communion ritual shows us and invites us into another way of being. So it's not just about the beauty of the flowers, though that is a central piece of it, but it's an embodied practice that gives us a glimpse of another way to be in this world. This simple ritual reminds us that in the face of violence, in the face of some people seeking to eliminate other people because of their gender or race or ethnicity or religious beliefs or identity, there is another way. The flower communion itself is an expression of that other way. This ritual acknowledges and celebrates difference. It reminds us that it is hard work to be in community. I loved the call to worship that you shared, Chad. In community, there are flowers in any bouquet, maybe with some prickers and some pricklies and some things that are a little sharp and rough. Sometimes there's a stinging nettle or two in the mix. And sometimes the flowers, maybe like I brought in some lily of the valleys, which I love, but I know some people experience them as very potent, very strong. In other words, it can be difficult and challenging to live with difference, with the prickles and the strong personalities and all that entails being in a community together. But the flower communion reminds us that difference is not something to get rid of. It is not something to destroy or fear. It is part of the fabric of creation itself. And thus, this ritual is an act of resistance, a declaration that diversity and difference must be celebrated and protected, especially in the face of oppressive forces. Then, like now, this ritual reminds us, the participants, that we can come together to create a bouquet of hope and to say to one another and to the world, there is another way. And that kind of message and proclamation, that threatens and undermines fascism and authoritarianism. And when the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia in 1940, they found Capek's teaching, his preaching, his inclusive faith, his hope in people, they found it to be too dangerous for the Reich. The Reich found that to be too dangerous for him to be allowed to live. So he was arrested and imprisoned. Before Capek died in Nazi medical experiments, it is said that he led the flower communion in prison. This is a story I heard from one of the former ministers, actually at First Universalist Church. He invited his fellow prisoners to bring what they could, little sticks, pieces of grass, a dandelion, perhaps a thistle, whatever it was that forced itself out of the ground in order to live. He invited them to bring those objects, and they came together. And in the death camp, they held this flower communion, seeing each other's humanity and reminding one another there is another way. After the war, it is said that the survivors of the death camps testified that a Unitarian minister could not have been sent to a place where he was more needed. Dachau was not his countryside peaceful church from decades before. But in that horrible place, Norbert Capek again started where he was. He used what he had, and he did what he could to create a community of care and a community of hope, held together by his words, and most importantly, by their shared offerings with one another. Shortly before his death, he wrote these words: "It is worthwhile to live and fight courageously for sacred ideals. O blow ye evil winds into my body's fire, my soul you'll never unravel. Even though disappointed 1,000 times or fallen in the fight and everything would worthless seem, I have lived amidst eternity. Be grateful, my soul. My life was worth living. He who was pressed from all sides but remained victorious in spirit is welcomed into the choir of heroes. He who overcomes the fetters, giving wing to the mind, is entering into the golden age of the victorious." And so, friends, on this Flower Communion Sunday, may we too, wherever we are, start right there and use what we have and do what we can as we fight for and protect our sacred ideals, loving and caring for one another. May it be so, and amen.